Hello, and welcome to Health 4308, Resistance Exercise Theory and Practice. The purpose of this online tutorial is to teach you the procedures associated with a case study in both the resistance exercise and the Health 4378 capstone course. The first thing that you want to do is to go online to Blackboard and to download the template file and the periodization summary file. When you do that, click on the template file, and I'm going to show you some important features associated with this file. First of all, what you're looking at right now is an Excel notebook, and in Excel there's multiple tabs at the bottom. So if you look right now, we are on the tab titled Case Study. But along this bottom axis there's a macro tab, there's a warm-up tab, there's a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, and a rubric tab. All of these will be important in this online demonstration. In the template that you actually use for the class, this rubric will not be important because that's embedded within Blackboard, and it shows how we'll grade the assignment. So if we go back to the case study file, you'll notice that in this particular notebook, there are 4 case studies. In the capstone course, students will select one of these 4 case studies, and that will be the individual in which you write the program for. This differs slightly from Health 4308. In that course, you'll actually write your own case study, and then you'll use that to derive your program from. So if you look at this, I just want us originally to read this first case study together. This is a 40-year-old female who's interested in beginning a comprehensive exercise program. She has no family history of disease and has been cleared by a medical doctor to perform vigorous exercise. She's been a member of a local gym for many years, participated in group classes, and performed low-intensity cardiovascular exercise 3 times a week her whole life. Her goal is to begin serious strength training and to have more visible muscles by summer. She has access to all of the necessary equipment and can devote 6 days per week training for 1.5 hours per day, design the program. So you see, in this case study, we have all the necessary information that we need to develop the program. Now I want to go over right now and just talk to you about the template, and then we'll come back and we'll look at an actual program derived for this 40-year-old female. Along this bottom axis in Excel, there will be tabs in which you will put your own information as you're designing your program. And the first one that I want to click on here is the macro tab. The macro tab is probably the most important tab contained within this notebook. And for you as an individual designing a resistance exercise program, it's probably the most important step other than the needs analysis. This is really going to drive or influence or guide the rest of the resistance exercise prescription. So if you look up here, there are a couple of different columns. There's one titled Micro, there's one titled Meso, there's one titled Type, Sets, Reps, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then a Rest Period tab. You will put information in each of these rows for a 16-week program that you'll develop for the individual, either one of the pre-made case studies in capstone or the case study that you develop yourself in the resistance exercise class. Within the micro tab, this is where you're going to insert the week. Now, you can very simply just put in a week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, week 5, week 6, and so on. You can notice that as I'm doing this, that Excel is automatically making this a date. I can change that format by clicking on it, left-clicking, and then right-clicking and going to Format Cells. And under Format Cells, I can change this to General. And when I do that, you can see that I come up now with just numbers. So I'm going to go ahead and complete this out here. I'm just going to click on a couple of the cells. I'm going to grab the right hand cursor at the bottom of the cell, and then I'm just going to go ahead and drag it down for the entire row. Notice that when I do that, it messes up my formatting a little bit here, so I'm going to go back and I'm actually going to fix this while I'm here. just so my project looks nice and neat. Putting a thick border around it. So we have our micro tab filled out here. Now you may want to actually put a date in here, which is what I prefer. Let's just assume that we're actually beginning this program on 1/15 or on 1/1/2015. And then we're going to go ahead and put in 1/8/2015. So this would be the next consecutive Monday within the week. I'm going to show you a little trick here in Excel that's important for you to learn. I'm now going to click on this. I'm going to right click. I'm going to say Format Cells. And I'm going to go back here to the date, and I'm going to put in a date, and I'm going to select whichever format that I like the best. I'm just going to pick this one here. So I'm going to click OK. Now if I left click and I again put my cursor on the right hand box here, I can drag it down, and Excel is going to go ahead and fill in the dates for the week in whatever format that I've selected here. Now notice that it automatically also puts in this this dark border line, which is associated with this micro tab. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back. I'm going to again fix this while I'm already here. So I'm clicking on the notebook or on the cells that I want to change. I'm then going to go back here. I'm going to click on this little box, and I'm going to put no border. And then I'm going to come back now, and I'm going to select the whole thing, and I'm going to put a large border over the entire box, and then I'm going to come here and I'm going to put a small border on the inside here. So I've got my dates here. The reason this is important to select your dates right off the beginning is because as we begin to design the program, it's going to be important for us to go back and to look at the dates, because there may be some time, for example, where we know that the individual is not going to work out. We started this one now on January the 1st. Now, if you look through here, you'll notice that if the person is a college student, there's probably somewhere in this time frame a spring break that occurs, so we may want to automatically plan an active rest period during that time. Or if this were over Christmas or Thanksgiving, we might assume that the individual is not going to work out very hard during that week, and so we wouldn't necessarily want to prescribe a high intensity training week there. So I've got my date set. I can go ahead and fill out the rest of this. Now I'm going to go over an actual program here in a minute, so I'm not going to fill this out, but what I am going to do is tell you what type of information is contained within each of these columns. So if you look up here, I have some little keys for you, or clues. If you see this little box, red box at the top, if we put our cursor over that, we see that I have a note for you here that says in the micro, this is where we insert the week. If we go to meso, you can see that I have some clues here for you on what type of information that I'm looking for. So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to put in a name for a mesocycle. So general preparation, anatomical adaptation, hypertrophy, strength, and so on. And we'll go over what that information means here in a minute. Now if we go here to type, and you put your cursor up here, you can see that we have things like combo, upper-lower split, 3-0-3 split, 5-day split. So different types of structures that we'll use. Sets and reps are sets and reps. And then up here for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, this is where we're going to put in the actual intensity. And the intensity is either going to be a percentage of a 1-rep max or a rating of perceived exertion. And then finally over here you'll see something called rest, and this is where we're going to put in our projected rest period between sets. Down at the bottom here you can see there's a tab for warm-up. You're going to put in a sample warm-up for me here. You want to put a component, and the component is essentially an exercise or an activity. So for example, it could be run for 7 consecutive minutes at 40 to 60% of your VO2 max, or it could be do an inchworm for 15 yards. So you want to explain the warm-up here for me. We want it to be a very general warm-up. In this case, we are warming up for resistance exercise. So keep that in mind as you do it. And then along the bottom here, you'll see phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. So this is where you're going to put in your actual exercises. And so, within each of these columns, for example, we might have a back squat exercise here, a bench press, a bench pull, and so on. We'll put in our sets and reps here, which should correspond back to our macro tab, and then we'll actually leave these blank. So just to explain a little bit, this is an actual workout card. So this right here on the macro tab would be what we use to kind of guide our prescription on a daily basis. It's the 10,000 foot overview that tells us the general direction that we're going in programming, whereas this is what the individual is actually doing day to day. And so you'll want to make sure that this card matches up back with your macro tab, with the sets and reps, and also with the structure that you're using here. Within this sets, we're not actually going to put any information here, but if I were giving this to an individual, I might actually write in the load that I want them to use on each of these exercises, and then have them track the actual number of repetitions. So say, for example, I'm prescribing a back squat exercise, and I tell them I want them to do 4 sets of 8. This would indicate for the individual that on the first set, I want you to lift with 135 pounds, on the second with 145, then 155, and then 165. And then the individual might take this card into the weight room and use it so that when they finish each of these, they can write in the actual number of reps that they completed. So maybe they got 8, 8, 8, and then 5. So if I were the coach to go back and look at this, I might say that if I actually want them to get 8 repetitions, that 165 load that I prescribed on that 4th set was a little bit too high, so I want to drop it down. So in this template file, you have 4 phases. You may or may not actually have information in all 4 of these phases. It'll be determined by how your case study ends up, or how your macro tab ends up being filled out, and how many mesocycles that you actually have here. The last thing that I want to show you in this introductory file, or in this template file, is the rubric. And the rubric explains how I'm going to grade this project. So there are some very important things that I'm looking for. You can see that some are weighted higher than others. For example, the macro cycle organization, the scientific validity, and your exercise selection are all worth 20 points apiece. The volume progression and intensity progression both worth 15, and then your neatness is worth 10 points. So as I'm going through here and I'm looking at your macro cycle organization, I'm going to make sure that it makes sense with respect to your case study. Are you using the appropriate lengths and the appropriate types of mesocycles? Is your progression, does it make sense for your case study? Is it logical the way it's organized? Your volume progression, I'm going to be looking at things like changes in volume over time. So as we transition, for example, from a hypertrophy phase to a strength phase, is there a decrease in volume? Is it progressing the right direction? Intensity, I'm going to be looking at how you daily affect your intensity or weekly affect your intensity, and are you prescribing an intensity that makes sense relative to the number of repetitions that you're prescribing. Scientific validity is going to be looking at, are you following the basic principles either that I've taught you in the resistance exercise class or that we taught you here in this program. And then the exercise selection is going to be looking at the exercises that you pick on the individual workout cards, determining whether they make sense with respect to your case study, and also determining whether or not you're changing those exercises on a regular enough basis in order to avoid accommodation. And then finally, your neatness is worth 10 points. And neatness just means I'm going to be looking at each individual card, looking at each individual macro cycle, or looking at the macro cycle tab and making sure that you've gone back and made things neat. So we don't want random colors, we don't want random lines, we don't want random numbers or fonts embedded within this. I want you to go back and look at this and make sure that you do a really good job on the final product. It's important. I always tell people that, in my opinion, this is actually a really good tool for you to bring into a job interview and to show your work. So I want you to imagine that you are applying for a job, and maybe that you're applying for your dream job. What would you like to show the person who's interviewing you as a reflection of your work? And that's the level of seriousness I want you to take on this project, and the level of seriousness I want you to put towards the final product that you turn in for the class. Now that you're familiar with the assignment and with the template file, I want to go over some of the more specific parameters of periodization that you're going to use in developing your project. So the first thing that I'm going to do is have you refer to this periodization summary table. And in that, I've summarized some material both from the book, PowerPoint presentations, and from other sources on some appropriate lengths, types, sets, reps, and so on for each mesocycle. So you'll see here in this table, just to explain it a bit more, that we have multiple columns and multiple rows. Each column represents a parameter within a mesocycle. Each row represents the parameters of the individual mesocycle. So, for example, here we have the mesocycle name in this column. We have the approximate length of the mesocycle. We have the type of training. Within type here, we mean, for example, the structure. So maybe it's a combination program where we're lifting the upper and the lower body on the same day, or maybe it's a split where we could lift the lower body on one day and the upper on another. Sets is the approximate number of sets, reps, the approximate number of reps, or a range of reps that we might prescribe within that mesocycle. Intensity is expressed as a percentage of a 1 rep max. Rest period means the rest in between each individual set. Velocity is the speed at which we will lift the weight. Exercises, both multi-joint and single joint, an approximate number that we want to prescribe within each cycle. And then purpose describes a bit the purpose of each phase. So the first phase that every program starts out with is a general preparation phase. And the purpose of the general preparation phase is to develop a conditioning base, and more specifically the endurance that you need to tolerate the higher volume training that we'll see in hypertrophy. So the general preparation phase can vary widely in the length. For example, we might have, for a professional athlete or an individual who's trained for many years, a short 2-week general preparation phase coming just out of the off-season phase, or we might have a general preparation phase that's half a year, maybe even a year, in an individual who's just starting a program. So say we're working with somebody who's 11 or 12 years old who's just starting a program. We really want to spend a lot of time developing a conditioning base, learning new exercises, and just developing a foundation before we move on to any other type of higher volume training. The type, we almost exclusively use a combination program in general preparation, because those are the types of exercises where we get higher metabolic demand. They're better for developing conditioning. We normally do 2 to 4 sets of somewhere around 10 to 15 repetitions. That may vary depending upon the individual, and it may vary within the session. The intensity is very low, 40 to 70% of the 1 rep max. And then we rest very short. So notice I have 0 to 60 seconds in this column. 0 indicates that we might actually be doing a circuit training program within this phase. 60 seconds would just be on the shorter end of a rest period. So if we're just working with a person that's starting out, we may not want to do a circuit because we want to make sure that they maintain their form while they're exercising, and so we might rest a short period of time between exercises. The velocity is moderate and self-selected, so we're not necessarily going to control the velocity here. We're just going to make sure that the individual is lifting the weight safely. Normally, we'll do anywhere from 3 to 6 multi-joint exercises, and then 0 to 4 single joint. The 3 to 6 multi-joint, we might, for example, have only a push, a pull, and a squatting exercise in this phase, and circuit those exercises. Or we could have a double leg support squatting exercise, a vertical pushing, a vertical pulling, followed by a horizontal pulling and a horizontal pushing, and a single leg support triple extension or squatting exercise. The bottom line is there's a lot of variation here, but we want to make sure that we're training all movements in order to develop the appropriate conditioning level. Hypertrophy is the second phase of training. We always have a hypertrophy phase, although the length of the hypertrophy phase will differ significantly based on the individual's training goals. So the purpose of the hypertrophy phase, as the name implies, is to increase the size of skeletal muscle, but also it's to increase the density of the connective tissue. And I think that's very important to realize, because we may work with an individual who isn't necessarily concerned with gaining size. Maybe it's an athlete who has to make a weight class, and so in that individual we wouldn't want to increase their muscle size and move them into a different weight class. However, we would want to make sure that we increase the size and the density of the connective tissue before we move on to a strength phase where we're going to be lifting higher loads. So hypertrophy phase is necessary. How long we stay in hypertrophy really depends upon the goal. If we're working with a bodybuilder whose goal is to gain size, then we would spend a longer time in hypertrophy. Normally in a hypertrophy phase, we use a split. We could use any type of split, really, an upper-lower split, kind of your typical muscle splits that you see people do. For example, legs on one day and chest and triceps on another, and back and biceps. So you know as much as I do about those types of splits. There's many of them that are out there. Hypertrophy is where we might use a structure like that. A 3-1 split, which I really like. A 3-1 split is we have 3 consecutive days where we lift, say, squatting movements on one day or leg movements on one day, pushing movements on the next day, pulling movements the following day, so maybe that's a Monday, Tuesday, and a Wednesday. We take Thursday off, and then Friday is a combination day, hence the 3-1 split. The combination day is probably more of a conditioning day, more similar to our general preparation work. In this type of program, we would lift anywhere from 3 to 10 sets for the major exercises, 8 to 12 repetitions, 60 to 80% of our 1 rep max. That's 80% would correspond to close to failure with somewhere around 10 to 12 repetitions. And we're going to rest a short period of time, 60 to 90 seconds in between sets. The short rest periods in hypertrophy is primarily to stimulate a metabolic response so that we're generating lactate. When we generate lactate, that appears to be a trigger for growth hormone, and growth hormone may help to facilitate an anabolic response to the exercise. Our velocity is moderate to slow. We're doing anywhere from 5 to 8 multi-joint exercises. Now that 5 to 8 is probably across the week. So 5 to 8 major exercises, making sure that we're hitting all of the big muscle groups or movements. And then during this phase, we're going to have more single joint exercises during any phase if we choose to incorporate that. The next phase is a strength phase. Everybody will have a strength phase, but the length of their strength phase may be shorter or longer depending upon their goals. So if we're working with an athlete whose primary goal is to develop strength, then we're going to have a longer phase, whereas if we have somebody who's more interested in hypertrophy, we might spend more time in that phase and a shorter period of time in strength. So we're going to bias the program towards the individual's training goals. We're going to use either a split or a combination structure here. Typically, the split that we would use would be an upper-lower split, not a muscle split in this phase. Because our volume is dropping as we go into strength training, and as the volume drops, then that means that we can get more work done on a single day for multiple muscle groups. Usually 3 to 5 sets of anywhere from 1 to 6 repetitions. That corresponds to an intensity, a top intensity of 85 to 100%. Our rest periods are longer. It takes 3 minutes to completely restore our ATP stores. It takes nearly 9 minutes or 7 to 9 minutes to replenish our phosphocreatine stores. The velocity is high, or the intentional velocity is high. That means that the load may be heavy, but we're trying to lift it as fast as we can, so the actual velocity may be slow. Normally, we're going to have 3 to 5 multi-joint exercises, 2 to 3 single joint, if we have any during this phase. So the purpose of this phase is to increase the force-generating capabilities of skeletal muscle, and the lower volume probably means that we're not going to have much of a hypertrophic response, although we will still have a bit of a hypertrophic response with heavier resistance training, although volume seems to be more important for hypertrophy. Power, we normally have a power phase after a strength phase. Purpose of power is to increase the specific power or the specific velocity generating capabilities of the neuromuscular system. Our power phase will be shorter. We won't necessarily have a 16-week power phase because we just can't maintain the quality of training for power for that long of a time. We'll always use a combination program in power. We will perform 3 to 5 sets of less than 5 repetitions or equal to or less than 5 repetitions. And we'll lift anywhere from 0 to 100% of our 1 rep max. So let me explain a little bit by what I mean by that, because it seems a little bit confusing. You'll remember that we talked about in class the idea of velocity-specific power, saying that there are some individuals that have to generate power at very low velocities and some at high velocities, and some more in the middle where peak power occurs. So to give you an example, an offensive lineman in football interacts with a defensive player who contacts them from a very short distance. Both individuals are heavy. When they engage, those movements tend to be a little bit slower. They would want to lift during their power phase on the heavier end of the spectrum because their velocity needs are lower velocity power. Whereas a volleyball player, who most of their movement is performed with their body weight, may want to bias their power towards higher velocity power training, specifically with more plyometric exercise during this phase. So 3 to 5 sets, less than or equal to 5 repetitions. We say less than or equal to 5 repetitions because if you go more than 5, there's a significant reduction in the actual velocity of the lift, and we're no longer working on power exclusively, we're working on something else. And we want to rest a long time, greater than or equal to 3 minutes between sets. We want a high intentional velocity, so that means if we're lifting a lower weight, it's actually going to move fast, or if we're lifting a heavier weight, it will move slower. The barbell will move slower even though we're attempting to move it as fast as we can. The volume drops, 3 to 4 sets or 3 to 4 exercises multi-joint, 0 to 3 single joint. And honestly, we rarely will perform those single joint exercises unless it's a special exercise for the sport and something that we need to do. Peaking is exactly what it sounds like. It's the phase that we go into just before a major competition. Peaking is honestly more appropriate for sports such as Olympic sports like track and field, weightlifting, so on, where we have a definitive event that we need to peak for. It doesn't work as well for, for example, baseball, where we have 160 plus games within a season. Everyone counts the same. So which one are we going to peak for? Same thing with basketball, an 82 game season, and football 16 weeks long. So in a peaking phase, if we have one, they're normally short, 2 to 4 weeks. There's a bit of a taper that we use to maximize the specific biomotor abilities for the sport. We exclusively use combination programs, 2 to 4 sets, like power less than or equal to 5 repetitions, 0 to 90% of our 1 rep max, and we rest a long time, lifting at a high intentional velocity. The active rest period is a phase that we'll have within most individuals' programs. It's normally where we do cross-training. We may prescribe that cross-training, or it may be on their own. It usually happens during a period of unloading after a big competition or in the off-season before we transition into the off-season. So coming out of the season, we might rest for up to a month leading into the next training season. So now that we've gone over the template file and we've also gone over the specific parameters of periodization in each mesocycle, I want to show you an example of a completed project. So this is a file which you do not have access to. This is a project that I actually worked up on my own as an example of how we might put together a program. And you'll see that I actually selected one of the case studies from the capstone course. So I selected this file on the 40-year-old female that's interested in beginning a comprehensive exercise program. So what I want to do first is look at this case study, because as we do that, we're going to find some important clues within it as we read each sentence. So the first thing we see is that the individual has no family history of disease and has been cleared by a medical doctor to perform vigorous exercise. So that means that we don't have to be afraid of the type of program that we're going to prescribe. If we were to read that and we see that the individual has diabetes, or that the individual has a history of cardiovascular disease, or perhaps some orthopedic injuries, then that may affect how we prescribe the program. But it seems here that we have a clean slate. There's no history of any type of medical problems. She's also been a member of a local gym for many years and done a bunch of group classes and performed lower intensity cardiovascular exercises 3 times a week her whole life. So what that tells us is that this individual has a pretty good conditioning base. So we don't have to have a long general preparation phase because the individual has been conditioning for a long period of time. We do want to engage in some very specific conditioning leading into the program, strength training specifically, before we start a hypertrophy phase. Her goal is to begin serious strength training and to have more visible muscles by the summer. So this is something that we see all the time. I carefully worded this. What an individual normally will tell us in this situation is that they just want to tone up. But I hate that terminology, obviously, because it's a misuse of the word tone. Tone is a property of skeletal muscle, and it's just that we always have a little bit of tone to muscle because we have a little bit of neurologic input to it at all time. So that's just a misuse, and I'm not going to use it. So visible skeletal muscles by the summer, or they just want to tone up. So what they really mean, or what an individual really means when they tell you that, is that they want to change their body in such a way that you are able to see their muscles better, and hence the word tone that they'll use oftentimes. So the prerequisite for having visible skeletal muscles is that we have to have skeletal muscle. And I think one of the problems or mistakes that people make oftentimes when they engage in these types of programs is they do very high repetition, very low weight, conditioning-based exercises that actually decreases their skeletal muscle in some case because the program is catabolic and not anabolic. So what we really want to do when we're trying to help an individual to develop a physique such that we can see their muscle is that we want hypertrophy. So when we look at this case study, the predominant phase that we're going to be in is a hypertrophy phase here. So the individual has access to all of the necessary equipment that's important. If the person wasn't a member of a gym or didn't have access to equipment, that obviously would affect how we prescribe the program. They're willing to lift weights 6 days a week for an hour and a half. So we have really a lot of room here for programming. So I'm going to turn now to the macro tab. And you'll see as I click on this macro tab that I have already completed the macro. And so I've already put the program together for this individual. So in this particular case, they're starting on October the 13th. And if we move out 16 weeks, this program is going to finish on January the 26th. So going back to the case study, they're actually going to have more time to get ready for the summer than this, but this just shows you an example of what it would look like if we started the program in middle October. So starting in middle October, the very first thing that you see here is that there's an active rest period here that obviously happens on Christmas week. Doesn't make sense for us to prescribe a lot of training during Christmas when the individual is probably not going to actually complete the training then. So I've just given them an active rest period here, assuming that they're probably going to take that week off, and that helps me to program around it. So I have a 2-week general preparation phase to start out here. I have a 4-week hypertrophy phase, a 4-week strength phase, an active rest phase, and then a 5-week hypertrophy phase to finish. So I actually have 2 hypertrophy phases here. I could have gone on to power at this point, but since the individual's goals were hypertrophy, I'm going to change gears a little bit here in the middle with some heavier resistance training, and then I'm going to go right back to their goal, which is hypertrophy. So right off the beginning here, you'll see something interesting, and that's we're going to begin the program with a rating of perceived exertion as our intensity and not a percentage of our 1RM. And the reason that we're doing that is we're probably not going to have a 1 rep max on this individual off the beginning. Instead, we'd like to train for a little bit, develop some competency in some core lifts, and then do a 1 rep max a little bit into the program. So we're using a combination training program. Approximately 3 sets of 12 to 15, beginning with a lower RPE and then ramping up a little bit. So you can see here there's a Monday, a Wednesday, and a Friday program, or that's the parameters of this program. Monday is an 8 RPE, Wednesday is a 6 and a 7, so this would equate to a high intensity, a low intensity, and then a medium intensity. And then we ramp it up a little bit the next week with a 9, 7, 8 RPE across the week. 30 seconds rest the whole time. Then, if we go to our next phase, you can see that we're actually going to use an upper-lower split in this individual. So they're going to be training on Monday and Tuesday, off Wednesday, then training Thursday, Friday. We're going to begin with 3 sets of 8 to 12. That's on the lower end of the volume spectrum for hypertrophy, but it's where we're going to start in this particular phase. We're actually going to do a 1RM right off the beginning here on the Monday of the 3rd week. We're going to take the next 2 days off before we begin our actual training for the hypertrophy phase. So notice, first of all, with the intensity here, that at the end of this week, we're going to have a couple of lower intensity days at 60% of 1RM. And then as we move into the next week, we're going to go 70, 80, 70 across the next 3 weeks of training. What we'll probably see here is that 70 and 80 are probably, or 70 or 60 and 70, excuse me, are probably sub-maximal, at least for the lower end of the rep range, 8. And then 80%, we're probably going to go to failure during this week at 3 sets of 8 to 12. And then we have a bit of a deloading week here going into the final week of the program. So the general stepping procedures, 60, 70, 80, and then back down to 70. That's the simplest and most classic progression across a 4-week microcycle, or 4 microcycles across a mesocycle. So going into the next week, we're now in a combination program, 4 sets of 5 for 4 weeks. And in this case, we're working out on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 2 to 3 minutes rest in between exercises. And so if we look here, we've got 78, 83, 87, 83. So this now equates to a low intensity, medium intensity, high intensity, medium intensity. Again, just a classic progression. You can do things slightly differently if you want. I do want to see, however, in your programming that you're building up to a higher intensity training microcycle, and then you allow a recovery week at some point. So we have an active rest period. We then go back into our second hypertrophy phase where the volume is a little bit higher in this case. And the intensity, again, is very similar to what it was before. This is, of course, a 5-week macro cycle. So we have 70, 75, 80, 75, 80. So this now equates to a low intensity, medium, high, medium, high. So this is going to be, this block of training here is going to be a little bit higher intensity than the previous one. To account for that, we're allowing 60 to 90 seconds rest because of the accumulation of intensity across the entire block, and then also the little bit higher volume. So if we click on the second tab here, WU warm-up, this shows you an example warm-up. Notice that we have foam rolling or self-myofascial release at the beginning for 5 minutes. It's left vague on purpose because normally we'll have an individual work on the areas where they're specifically tight or where they may have some myofascial knots. We then have a jump rope, 5 minutes, which is our general warm-up. We want that to be steady and rhythmic. And then we go into a dynamic warm-up or mobility exercises, a hip bridge progression followed by bent knee sit-ups, followed by knee drops, all of these to warm up our trunk. Then walking lunges, straight leg march, lunge with reach, walking RDL, walking quad stretch, inchworm, low bear crawl, and then whatever exercise would be first. We, of course, would want to lift with a lighter weight off the beginning to allow a more specific warm-up. So my first phase here is general preparation. Notice that I've renamed this tab from phase 1 to GP. It is a 2-week cycle. If we go back here, we'll notice that that's actually matches up to this. I will be looking for that in your program. I want to make sure that what you say in this overview tab that you're actually doing in training. So notice we have 3 sets of 12 to 15 reps. That's just copied again from the macro. But in here we actually have the specific exercises. And so in this particular program, I'm just going to do the same exercises on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday because I'm not that concerned with the exercises. I'm more concerned with the conditioning effect that I get from the exercises. So we have a triple extension exercise, an upper body pushing, an upper body pulling, a single leg support triple extension, an upper body pushing, an upper body pulling, and then I just say arms here, kind of self-program or what I call OP, own program. I don't necessarily prescribe single joint exercises, but if they want to go do that kind of stuff, we will allow them to. Same program, 3 days a week. At the end of this, they really should be ready to tolerate the higher volume going into hypertrophy. Now, notice going into hypertrophy, our program changes now from Monday, Tuesday, or changes from Monday, Wednesday, Friday to Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. If we go back here to the macro tab, we'll see that we're doing an upper-lower split. 3 sets, 8 to 12 repetitions. And that appropriately lines up. This time, our split, we've got front squats step up, heel raise, and hamstring curls on the Monday. We then have dumbbell bench press, dumbbell row, overhead press, lat pull down, barbell curl, and tricep press down. And then we repeat that on Thursday and Friday. Again, keeping it simple at this point because I don't want to learn a bunch of new exercises. I want to be able to increase the volume without the fear of injuring the individual. Now, I want to show you something here that I think is important. Notice that not all of my exercises are 3 sets of 8 to 12. Instead, on some of the volume for the single joint exercises, I have 2 sets instead of 3 sets. So you don't have to do exactly what our macro tab says. This is just a general guide. We want to be logical in how we prescribe the exercise and logical with how much volume we're giving the individual. So we then move into our strength phase. We have back squats, push press, pull-ups, and dumbbell lunges on this day. So notice now that we've gone back to a combination program. We have our triple extension exercise. We have an upper body pushing exercise, actually a total body pushing exercise, a pulling exercise, and then a single leg support leg exercise. And notice the difference in volume here. We then have a hinging exercise, the deadlift, which is both a back and leg exercise, a bench press, a barbell row, and a glute ham raise. And then we repeat it again here on the 3rd day. So notice that I'm changing the exercises every 4 to 6 weeks. We do that to avoid accommodation. If we don't change the exercises often enough, then we run the risk of accommodating. If we change the exercises too often, we run the risk of not actually getting stronger, just learning a bunch of new tricks in the weight room. So 4 to 6 weeks is the general recommendation. It just makes sense here that I'm changing it after 4 because I'm changing phases. And then finally we go back into a second hypertrophy phase where you'll see that we're actually reintroducing some of the old exercises into this program. We're at a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday again, so we're upper-lower split. This takes us week 12 to week 16. For the leg day, we have lower extremity, triple extension or squatting exercise, a single leg support, squatting exercise, a bent knee heel raise, a lateral lunge, the first lateral exercise we've actually incorporated in, and then a hamstring curl. Likewise, on our Tuesday program, incline press, dumbbell row, Arnold press, lat pull down, curl, and a skull crusher. My Thursday and Friday exercises are different than the Monday and Tuesday exercises. I'm doing that now because I'm more confident in the individual's training experience. I've coached them now for 12 weeks. I feel confident enough that I can introduce these new exercises and it won't be too much. So on Thursday, they have a dumbbell split squat, a Romanian deadlift with the barbell, heel raise, and a weighted vest lateral lunge, and a physio ball hamstring curl. And then on the Friday, a dumbbell bench press, a towel inverted row, push jerk pull-ups, hammer curl, and closed grip bench press. So I'm reintroducing some exercises in this phase that I've used previously, but I actually cycled them out for a phase before I reintroduced them. So this is an example program. You don't have to do this exactly the way that I did. I'm just giving you some ideas for how I might prescribe this program. Now, I do want you to be very cautious with how you do this. I want you to be creative, but in the same respect, I don't want you to create outside of the bounds of science and outside of the bounds of some of the general principles that have been taught to you, both in this class and in the program in general. So I'm going to make sure that we're following the guidelines of periodization. The summary table should do a very good job of helping you to have a good guideline for how to do this. And if you have any questions, I really would invite you to ask those questions to me. I invite you to come by my office and to show me your program before you turn it in. I'll be happy to give you feedback, tell you some things that you can change to improve the program. Also, just be happy to talk to you about it if you have any questions or ideas that you'd like to discuss. I learn more from this every semester than I do from anything else. Everybody always has some new and creative things that gives me new ideas going forward in training, and I have no doubt that this semester will be the same. So I hope you've learned from this overview. We will not be talking in detail about this project in class, although we will at least introduce it in class. Be sure to look over this before we have that session, and then if you have any questions, I ask that you bring it to that meeting. Thank you.